In the hushed hours of the night, when the bustle of the day gently fades into stillness, we may allow ourselves to wander through time, slipping softly into the stories of those who came before us. Tonight, as you close your eyes and breathe steadily, we will journey together into the long arc of history. Our subject is Justinian I, Emperor of the Byzantine Empire, one of the most formidable rulers of late antiquity. His reign, stretching from the year 527 to 565, carries with it the echoes of grandeur, ambition, and resilience. Yet as we listen now, there is no urgency, only the slow unfolding of centuries, gently guiding you into rest. Justinian emerges from the shadow of the ancient Roman world, in an age when the Mediterranean was no longer the unified sea it had been under Augustus or Trajan. By the 6th century, the western half of the Roman Empire had fractured and fallen to new kingdoms: the Ostrogoths in Italy, the Visigoths in Spain, the Vandals in North Africa, and the Franks in Gaul. In the east, however, the empire endured. Centered on Constantinople, the new Rome founded by Constantine the Great, the Byzantine state maintained the traditions of Roman law and governance, infused with Greek culture and the growing authority of Christianity. It is here, in this fertile mix of continuity and transformation, that Justinian rose to power. Born around the year 482 in the Balkan province of Dardania, Justinian was not of imperial stock. His uncle, Justin, had risen through the military ranks to become emperor in 518. Through education and ambition, Justinian positioned himself as heir to the throne. When Justin passed, the younger man inherited not only a vast realm, but also its burdens. His mind burned with the idea of renovatio imperii, the restoration of the empire to its ancient glory. This dream of restoration would shape nearly every aspect of his reign, from the codification of Roman law into the enduring corpus juris civilis, to the reconquest of territories once held by Rome, to the construction of monumental architecture such as the soaring Hagia Sophia. To understand Justinian's world, we must also imagine the daily rhythms of Byzantine life. Constantinople was a city of shimmering contrasts: glittering domes reflecting the sun, bustling marketplaces filled with merchants from distant lands, and narrow lanes where artisans labored at their crafts. The city's position on the Bosporus Strait made it a hub of trade, drawing goods from Asia, Africa, and Europe. Silks from China, spices from India, grain from Egypt, and furs from the north all passed through its harbors. In the evenings, citizens gathered at the Hippodrome, the great chariot racing arena, where the rival factions of the Blues and Greens stirred passionate loyalties that could spill into riots. Beneath the surface of imperial grandeur lay social tensions, class divides, and the pressing challenge of defending borders against the Persians, Slavs, and other neighbors. At Justinian's side was Theodora, one of history's most remarkable empresses. Emerging from humble origins, she transformed into a powerful partner, shaping policies and advocating for women's rights. Her voice and resolve during crises, such as the Nika Riots of 532, ensured the survival of Justinian's rule. Together, they embodied a dynamic vision of leadership. He, the architect of laws and conquests. She, the guardian of resilience and compassion. The world Justinian sought to command was fragile. Plagues swept through the empire, thinning its population and straining its economy. Wars against Persians and Germanic kingdoms drained resources, even as victories briefly rekindled the light of Rome's past. His codification of law, however, endured beyond the fall of empires, shaping the legal traditions of Europe and beyond for centuries. His buildings, particularly the Hagia Sophia with its vast dome seeming to float upon light, testified to the union of earthly power and divine inspiration. As we drift through this long history, our goal is not hurried judgment, but calm reflection. We will follow Justinian's life from his early years in the provinces to his rise beside his uncle Justin, from the challenges of consolidating power to the drama of the Nika Riots, from his campaigns of reconquest to the struggles of plague and war, from the shimmering achievements of art and law to the quieting shadows of decline, and finally, to his enduring legacy as the emperor who sought to reunite a fractured world. Tonight's journey will unfold in gentle chapters, each carefully guiding you deeper into the story. The words will linger on descriptions of architecture, law, and landscapes, but they will not rush. Each moment will stretch like a quiet path through a tranquil garden, allowing your thoughts to ease, your breath to slow, and your body to soften into rest. So, as you settle into comfort, know that this story belongs to you now, just as it has belonged to countless listeners through time. The empire of Justinian is both distant and near, distant in centuries, yet near in its shaping of our laws, our cities, and our traditions. With every word, let the weight of the day fall away. Let the Byzantine world open gently before you, vast and calm, with domes gleaming in the twilight, waters lapping at Constantinople's shores, and the hum of history guiding you softly toward dreams. In the stillness of the early 6th century, long before Justinian became emperor, we find him as a child of modest origins in the rugged lands of the Balkans. He was born around the year 482 in a small village of the Roman province of Dardania, in what is today part of North Macedonia or Kosovo. This was a frontier region of the Byzantine world, remote from the great cities of Constantinople, Alexandria, or Antioch. The landscape was marked by mountains, pastoral fields, and the small farms of peasants who lived in relative obscurity, far from the centers of imperial politics. Life here was simple, often difficult, shaped by the rhythms of agriculture and the uncertainties of frontier life. Justinian's family, though not noble, belonged to the sturdy military class that supplied soldiers for the empire. His uncle, Justin, would eventually rise to the highest position in the empire, but in these years he was merely a peasant soldier serving in the Byzantine army. For the young Justinian, the provincial world offered little promise of imperial destiny. Yet, from these quiet beginnings, an extraordinary life would unfold. What distinguished Justinian, even as a youth, was his thirst for learning. His family recognized his intelligence and ambition, and when his uncle Justin established himself in Constantinople through military service, he arranged for the young boy to join him in the capital. For Justinian, the transition from the rustic hills of Dardania to the bustling metropolis of Constantinople must have been transformative. Imagine the shift, from villages where life was measured in harvests to a city of 500,000 people, alive with trade, ceremony, and imperial spectacle. Constantinople, founded by Constantine the Great in 330, was designed as a new Rome, but with its own Eastern splendor. By Justinian's time, the city was encircled by massive Theodosian walls, its harbors filled with ships bearing goods from across the empire. The young student would have seen grand forums lined with statues of emperors, colonnaded streets, and the echoing halls of churches and palaces. He would also have experienced the cultural blend of Greek, Roman, and Christian traditions, all mingling in the heart of the Byzantine state. Education was the key to advancement, and Justinian immersed himself in studies. He learned Latin, the language of law and administration, and Greek, the language of philosophy, literature, and theology. He studied Roman law, which provided the foundation for governance, and absorbed the works of the Church Fathers, whose writings shaped the spiritual life of the empire. Justinian was not merely a bookish youth, however. He also trained in the skills of administration and diplomacy, preparing himself for a future role in public life. The society around him was one of vivid contrasts. Constantinople's great hippodrome resounded with the cheers of racing factions, while nearby, the city's poor crowded into cramped neighborhoods. Merchants from distant lands brought silks, spices, and precious stones, while senators and officials debated matters of state. The atmosphere was electric with ambition, and Justinian, though provincial by birth, adapted quickly. He carried with him the perspective of an outsider who had to prove himself through diligence and discipline. Religious devotion also marked his early life. Christianity had long since become the empire's official faith, and the controversies of theology often shaped politics as much as piety. The debates over Christ's nature, the balance between his divinity and humanity, were fierce in Justinian's time. Though still a young man, Justinian absorbed these theological arguments deeply, later becoming one of the most active emperors in church affairs. For him, the harmony of doctrine and the unity of the church would be as important as military conquest or legal reform. Historians note that Justinian's early years were defined by this duality, a rustic upbringing that instilled resilience and humility, paired with an urban education that opened the doors of opportunity. He was never known for physical prowess, like a great general, nor for aristocratic lineage, like many of his predecessors. Instead, his strength lay in his mind, in an unrelenting focus, an ability to master complexity, and a vision that reached far beyond the ordinary. As we imagine him walking the marble colonnades of Constantinople as a young student, we can sense the quiet determination forming within him. He was not yet emperor, nor even an official of great rank, but he was already nurturing an ambition that would one day stretch across the Mediterranean world. From the humble soil of Dardania to the intellectual gardens of Constantinople, Justinian's journey had begun. As you allow your breath to deepen, picture this young man standing at the threshold of history. Around him, the city stirs with voices and footsteps, the markets ring with the sounds of trade, and the sea shimmers beneath the walls of the capital. In the stillness of night, his story feels both distant and near, an invitation to drift further into the unfolding tale. The story of Justinian's ascent cannot be told without first pausing on the figure of his uncle, Justin. It was through this older man's journey that the younger Justinian's pathway into power was opened. Justin, born like his nephew in the rural Balkans, had risen not by education or aristocratic connections, but by the sheer grit of military service. As a young soldier, Justin had left behind the fields of Dardania and joined the Byzantine army, eventually becoming commander of the imperial guard, the Excubitors. His loyalty, resilience, and practical sense carried him into the corridors of power. When Emperor Anastasius I died in 518 without an heir, a scramble for succession followed. Justin, though illiterate and in many ways an unlikely candidate, emerged as emperor, elected by the support of the Guard and the Senate. His reign was cautious and pragmatic. He managed religious disputes with moderation and maintained relative stability. But behind Justin's throne stood another figure, increasingly influential, his nephew, Justinian. From the start, Justinian served as his uncle's close advisor, drawing upon his legal training, command of languages, and sharp intellect. Where Justin lacked education, Justinian supplied it. Their partnership reflected a balance of practical military experience and scholarly acumen. By the mid-520s, Justinian was effectively co-ruler, even before he formally received the title of Caesar and later Augustus. During these years, Justinian gained his first experiences in governance. He handled legal disputes, advised on theological controversies, and negotiated with foreign envoys. His reputation grew not only as a capable administrator, but also as a man of vision, someone who believed the Byzantine Empire could rise once more to the grandeur of its Roman past. He poured his energies into understanding the challenges of the empire, the tension between rival Christian factions, the need to strengthen the capital's defenses, the intricacies of managing provinces spread across 3 continents. The young statesman was also a figure of the court, navigating its intrigues with remarkable skill. The Byzantine palace was a world of ceremony and rivalry. Senators, generals, church leaders, and courtiers all competed for influence, and Justinian, though lacking aristocratic birth, learned to maneuver with quiet persistence. He cultivated allies, rewarded loyalty, and relied on his growing reputation as a man of deep learning and unshakable faith. It was also during this time that Justinian began his partnership with Theodora, a woman whose early life would have seemed far removed from the imperial palace. Their bond, though unconventional to some observers, became central to his rise and reign. We will dwell on her story in greater detail later. But here, in the years of Justin's rule, their relationship solidified Justinian's authority and broadened his perspective. By 527, Justin's health was failing. The aging emperor could no longer manage the daily burdens of governance. It was then that Justinian was officially crowned co-emperor, sharing the weight of the diadem. A few months later, upon Justin's death, Justinian stood as sole ruler of the Byzantine Empire. His coronation marked the culmination of a remarkable ascent, from a provincial farm in Dardania to the throne of one of the most powerful states in the known world. The new emperor inherited both opportunities and challenges. The Byzantine Empire in 527 was strong but beset by difficulties. The Sasanian Persians threatened the eastern frontier. The western provinces, lost to Germanic kingdoms, stood as a constant reminder of Rome's diminished glory. Religious divisions between Chalcedonian Christians, Monophysites, and other sects threatened unity. The treasury was burdened, and the people of Constantinople restless. And yet, Justinian was not deterred. In fact, He embraced the enormity of the task with determination. His vision, summed up in the phrase renovatio imperii, or restoration of the empire, would shape his policies for decades to come. He saw himself not merely as a caretaker of a shrinking state, but as a new Augustus, destined to restore Rome's ancient power. What gave him confidence was not only his administrative experience, but also his faith. Justinian believed deeply in divine providence, that God had chosen him for this mission. His reign would therefore be marked by a sense of destiny, an intertwining of religious devotion and imperial ambition. The empire's survival and expansion, in his eyes, were bound to the triumph of Christian truth. As we reflect on this moment of transition, from Justin to Justinian, we sense the turning of an age. The older generation of soldier emperors, rough and pragmatic, gave way to a ruler of learning and vision, one who carried the Roman legacy with an almost mystical sense of duty. The palace halls, lit with the glow of lamps, echoed with the ceremonial hymns of coronation. Outside in the city, the people celebrated the beginning of a reign that promised grandeur and restoration. Tonight, as we drift in thought, we may linger with that image. A man once a provincial boy, now adorned in imperial robes, standing in Hagia Sophia as chants rise to the dome. Around him, courtiers bow, and the citizens of Constantinople look with expectation. The empire is vast, the challenge is great, but Justinian's eyes are fixed forward, steady and determined. His journey as emperor has just begun. At the heart of Justinian's reign, one figure stands beside him with unwavering presence, his wife and empress, Theodora. To understand Justinian fully, we must pause to explore her remarkable journey. A life that began in hardship, yet culminated in the highest station of Byzantine society. Theodora's story is a testament to resilience, transformation, and the profound impact one individual can have on the course of history. Theodora was born around the year 500, the daughter of a bear trainer employed at the Hippodrome of Constantinople. Her early circumstances were far from imperial. When her father died, her family's security collapsed. Her mother struggled to keep her children supported and turned to the circus factions, the Blues and the Greens, for assistance, eventually securing employment for her daughters. Theodora herself entered the world of performance, working as an actress in the Hippodrome. At that time, the profession of actress was not regarded with respect. Indeed, it often implied association with a life of poverty, marginality, and scandal. From these humble beginnings, Theodora forged a path of self-reinvention. She traveled widely, including time spent in North Africa, where she lived as a courtesan. But during these years, she developed not only survival skills, but also a sharp intelligence, keen observation of human nature, and resilience in adversity. By her mid-20s, Theodora had returned to Constantinople, living modestly and supporting herself through spinning wool. It was in this chapter of her life that her trajectory shifted dramatically. Around 522, she caught the attention of Justinian, then heir apparent to the throne. Despite the disapproval of many in the court, including laws that traditionally forbade men of senatorial rank from marrying actresses, Justinian's admiration for her grew into profound love. To overcome this barrier, his uncle, Emperor Justin, issued legislation allowing the marriage, a striking demonstration of Justinian's determination. Theodora soon became not only his consort, but also his partner in governance. When Justinian ascended the throne in 527, Theodora was crowned empress alongside him. Her influence was immediate and unmistakable. Theodora was not content to remain in the ceremonial shadow of the palace. Instead, she engaged actively in policy, advising Justinian and shaping the empire's direction. Contemporary historian Procopius, who chronicled Justinian's reign, reveals in his Secret History a complex portrait of Theodora, admired for her courage and intelligence, criticized for her boldness and severity. His accounts, though sometimes hostile, confirm her significance in imperial affairs. One of Theodora's most important contributions was her advocacy for women's rights and social reform. Under her influence, laws were enacted to protect women from exploitation. She strengthened penalties against forced prostitution, established safe houses for women leaving such work, and supported greater protections for women in marriage and property disputes. In a world where women's voices were often marginalized, Theodora's actions left a tangible imprint on Byzantine society. Her role extended into the realm of religion as well. The empire in the 6th century was torn by theological disputes, particularly between Chalcedonian Christians, who affirmed the dual nature of Christ, and Monophysites, who emphasized his singular divine nature. Theodora sympathized with the Monophysite cause, offering them protection even as Justinian sought to preserve Chalcedonian orthodoxy. This difference between them did not divide their union, but instead created a subtle balance. Justinian worked for unity on an official level, while Theodora ensured that minority voices were not extinguished. The strength of her character shone most clearly during the crisis of the Nika Riots in 532. When Constantinople erupted in violence against Justinian's rule, the emperor nearly fled the city. It was Theodora who stood firm, delivering words that have echoed through history. Royalty is a fine burial shroud. With this, she declared her resolve to remain and die as an empress if necessary. Her courage emboldened Justinian and his advisors to act decisively, ultimately crushing the rebellion and saving the throne. Daily life for Theodora within the palace was a mixture of ceremony, devotion, and influence. She participated in grand processions, presided over court rituals, and received ambassadors. Yet behind the shimmering mosaics and marble halls, she also engaged in confidential discussions, shaping responses to crises and encouraging reforms. Theodora was no mere ornament of the imperial court. She was a co-ruler in substance, if not in official title. For contemporaries, Theodora was a figure of fascination, even controversy. To some, she embodied the ideal of a wise and courageous empress. To others, her rise from humble origins seemed a disruption of the social order. But to Justinian, she was indispensable. Their partnership reveals an emperor willing to share power in ways that challenge tradition, and an empress whose voice resonated in the heart of empire. As you imagine her now, think of Theodora not only as a mosaic in Ravenna or a name in chronicles, but as a woman of determination seated beside her husband, her gaze steady, her words sharp, her presence unshakable. Together, they formed a dyad of intellect and will. He, the architect of law and empire. She, the guardian of resilience and reform. And as the lamps of Constantinople flicker in our imagination, the empress takes her place at Justinian's side. Her path from circus performer to imperial throne reminds us that history is never shaped solely by birth or station, but by the choices and strength of those who live it. In the quiet of night, her story lingers, inviting reflection on the many ways resilience can shape destiny. The Byzantine Empire in the year 532 stood at a delicate balance. Justinian had been emperor for 5 years, and his ambitious vision for the restoration of Rome's greatness was already unfolding. Yet beneath the polished surface of imperial authority, unrest simmered. It was in this year that one of the greatest crises of his reign erupted, the Nika Riots. This episode, at once terrifying and transformative, revealed both the fragility of power and the resilience of those who held it. To understand the riots, we must first picture the central role of the Hippodrome in the life of Constantinople. This massive stadium, capable of holding tens of thousands of spectators, was the city's beating heart. Here, chariot races were staged, processions displayed imperial grandeur, and the people's passions found loud expression. The Blues and the Greens, the two great factions of the racing world, were not merely sports clubs. They were political, religious, and social collectives whose rivalries ran deep. Their supporters spanned classes, from commoners to members of the aristocracy, and their contests often spilled beyond the track into the streets of the city. By 5532, tensions had grown between the factions and the authorities. The people were angered by high taxes, harsh enforcement of laws, and the sense that Justinian's policies favored the elite at their expense. Discontent simmered, especially among those burdened by new levies necessary to fund the emperor's military campaigns and ambitious building projects. When the Blues and Greens clashed during a chariot race in January of that year, violence erupted, and several participants were arrested. 2 were sentenced to death, 1 from each faction, but they escaped and took refuge in a church. The crowd demanded clemency, and when Justinian refused, the situation escalated into a full-scale uprising. For several days, Constantinople descended into chaos. The Hippodrome became a rallying point for the rioters, who shouted Nika, meaning conquer or victory, as they marched through the streets. Fires consumed large sections of the city, including the original church of Hagia Sophia. Imperial officials were attacked, palaces and public buildings looted, and the very order of the empire seemed to teeter on collapse. At one point, the mob even declared a new emperor, Hypatius, a nephew of the former ruler Anastasius. Within the palace, panic reigned. Justinian, deeply shaken, considered fleeing the city by sea. To him, the throne seemed lost, and escape was the only means of survival. Yet it was in this darkest hour that Theodora's strength became decisive. She addressed the imperial council with unflinching resolve, reminding them that flight would mean disgrace and ruin. Her words, recorded by Procopius, resounded with immortal clarity. Royalty is a fine burial shroud. To Theodora, death as an empress was preferable to life in exile. Her determination steadied Justinian's will. Emboldened by her council, Justinian and his generals, including the famed Belisarius, devised a ruthless plan. They bribed leaders of the Blues, persuading them to abandon the Greens and withdraw their support. Then, with the factions divided, imperial troops stormed the Hippodrome, where rioters had gathered in their tens of thousands. What followed was a massacre. Contemporary sources suggest that over 30,000 people perished within the stadium's walls, their cries silenced in a single day of slaughter. The rebellion, once so threatening, collapsed utterly. The aftermath of the Nika Riots was both sobering and transformative. The city lay scarred by fire and destruction. Entire districts had been reduced to ashes, and many lives were lost. Yet, out of this devastation, Justinian saw an opportunity to rebuild not only the physical structures of Constantinople, but also the image of his rule. It was in the wake of the riots that he commissioned the construction of the great Hagia Sophia, a church whose dome seemed to float upon light itself. The disaster thus gave birth to one of the greatest achievements of Byzantine architecture. Politically, the suppression of the riots marked a turning point. Justinian emerged stronger, his authority no longer in question. By crushing the rebellion so decisively, he sent a clear message that imperial power would not be challenged lightly. Theodora's role in this moment elevated her stature in the eyes of the court and the people. She was no longer simply consort, but a co-ruler whose courage preserved the empire. In reflecting upon the Nika Riots, one senses the precariousness of authority in Constantinople. An emperor, even one as ambitious as Justinian, could find his throne endangered by the anger of the crowd, by factions that combine sport, politics, and social unrest. Yet one also senses the resilience of empire. How crisis, instead of toppling a ruler, could become the crucible of renewal. As we drift gently over this episode, imagine the city at night after the turmoil. Smoke still lingers in the air, and the ruins glow faintly in the moonlight. But within the palace, determination is rekindled. From devastation will rise new domes, new laws, and new campaigns of conquest. The emperor and empress, tested by fire, remain on their thrones. The city quiets, and history moves forward once more, as steadily as a heartbeat. In the quiet aftermath of the Nika Riots, when flames had consumed much of Constantinople and the memory of violence still hovered over the city, Justinian turned his eyes toward renewal. From ruin would rise a monument of such magnificence that it would stand as both a statement of divine authority and an emblem of imperial resilience, the Hagia Sophia. The church that bore this name before 532 had already been a grand structure, but the riots reduced it to rubble. Rather than rebuild modestly, Justinian envisioned something unprecedented, a temple that would surpass all others in beauty, size, and splendor. He intended not merely to restore, but to proclaim, through architecture, the glory of his reign and the favor of God upon his rule. To bring this vision into being, Justinian summoned two remarkable minds: Anthemius of Tralles, a mathematician and engineer, and Isidore of Miletus, a physicist and architect. These men, masters of geometry and design, were tasked with creating a building that would stretch the limits of architectural possibility. Their challenge was to design a dome so vast that it would seem to float upon the air, illuminated by shafts of light that streamed through rows of windows. Construction began almost immediately after the riots, and within less than 6 years, the new Hagia Sophia was completed, an astonishing feat given its size and complexity. Imagine the scene of its rising. Thousands of laborers hauling stone, marble, and timber, ships arriving at the city's harbors carrying columns salvaged from temples of antiquity, artisans carving intricate capitals and laying mosaics. The empire's resources poured into this single project, and the city's skyline slowly transformed. When the church was consecrated in 5537, Justinian is said to have entered the completed sanctuary and cried out, "Solomon, I have outdone thee." This legendary remark captured his sense of triumph. The Hagia Sophia, with its central dome soaring over 100 feet in diameter, appeared to rest not on solid walls, but on a cascade of arches and semi-domes. Light flooded the interior, glimmering off golden mosaics and polished marble, creating an atmosphere that seemed both earthly and celestial. To those who entered, it was as though they stood in the very threshold of heaven. Inside, the vast open space astonished worshippers. The floor gleamed with multicolored marble, arranged in patterns like flowing water. The walls rose into heights that defied expectation, covered in mosaics that shimmered in candlelight. Above, the great dome seemed to float, its ring of windows creating an illusion of weightlessness. The sound of chants and hymns reverberated through the cavernous space, filling every corner with a sense of eternity. The Hagia Sophia was not only a place of worship, but also a symbol of imperial authority. Its grandeur communicated Justinian's vision of a restored empire, an empire rooted in faith, law, and divine order. The church served as the seat of the Patriarch of Constantinople and the stage for imperial ceremonies, coronations, and processions. It became the very heart of Byzantine spiritual and political life, embodying the unity of church and state. The building also reflected the fusion of traditions that defined the Byzantine world. Roman engineering, Greek aesthetics, and Christian symbolism intertwined within its walls. Columns taken from ancient temples in Asia Minor and Greece were repurposed, linking the new with the old. In its mosaics, biblical scenes stood alongside imperial portraits, emphasizing the partnership of God's will and emperor's rule. For the people of Constantinople, the Hagia Sophia became both sanctuary and spectacle. Pilgrims traveled from distant lands to marvel at its scale. Merchants, ambassadors, and visitors carried tales of its magnificence across the Mediterranean. Over centuries, the church would witness countless ceremonies, theological debates, and political intrigues. Even in times of siege or despair, its dome remained a beacon of Byzantine endurance. Yet beyond its historical significance, the Hagia Sophia offered an experience of serenity. Imagine walking into its cool interior from the bustling streets outside. The noise of the city fades, replaced by the gentle echo of footsteps on marble. Candles flicker in golden holders, their light reflected in the gilded mosaics. The scent of incense drifts upward, dissolving into the vast dome above. Every element invites a sense of peace, a lifting of the spirit. For Justinian, the completion of Hagia Sophia was a defining moment of his reign. It proclaimed his survival after the Nika Riots, his command of resources, and his vision of a Christian empire united in faith and beauty. More than any conquest or law, it was this building that embodied his dream of Renovatio Imperii, the restoration of imperial greatness. As we rest with this image, let the great dome of Hagia Sophia linger in the mind's eye. Picture the sunlight streaming through its windows at dawn, illuminating the golden mosaics, or the quiet glow of oil lamps at night, casting soft shadows across the marble floor. In this serene space, history and eternity meet. The emperor's ambition, the artisan's craft, and the faithful's prayers all converge beneath a single dome, rising like a promise toward heaven. As the dome of Hagia Sophia lifted toward heaven, Justinian turned his attention to another monumental project, one not of stone and mortar, but of words, laws, and ideas. This was the Corpus Juris Civilis, the body of civil law, a codification of Roman law that became one of the most enduring achievements of his reign. If Hagia Sophia embodied the spiritual vision of the empire, the Law Code expressed its intellectual and civic order. Together, they represented Justinian's belief in the unity of faith and governance, of divine will and human justice. The Roman Empire had always been governed by law, but by the 6th century, the legal system had grown unwieldy. Centuries of decrees, opinions, and case rulings overlapped in confusion. Jurists cited ancient texts alongside recent edicts, often contradicting one another. For administrators and citizens alike, the law was a labyrinth. Justinian, with his drive for clarity and order, resolved to bring this vast inheritance into a single, coherent system. In 528, only a year into his reign, he appointed a commission led by the eminent jurist Tribonian to begin the task. Tribonian, a man of deep knowledge and considerable skill, assembled a team of scholars to comb through centuries of legal texts. Their work was not merely to compile, but to refine, to remove contradictions, and to align Roman law with the values of a Christian empire. The result unfolded in stages. The first was the Codex Justinianus, issued in 529, which gathered and organized imperial decrees dating back to Hadrian. This was followed by the Digest or Pandects in 533, a vast anthology of juristic writings, selecting and condensing the wisdom of Rome's greatest legal minds. Then came the Institutes, a handbook for students outlining the principles of law in a clear, systematic way. Finally, the revised Codex of 534 consolidated everything into a comprehensive framework. Together, these works formed the Corpus Juris Civilis. The significance of this achievement cannot be overstated. For the Byzantine Empire, it provided a stable legal foundation, clarifying rights, obligations, and procedures. It affirmed the emperor's role as the ultimate source of law, guided by divine authority. For citizens, it offered consistency and fairness, at least in principle, across the diverse lands of the empire. Beyond its immediate utility, the law code carried within it the legacy of Rome. By preserving and transmitting Roman jurisprudence, Justinian ensured that the wisdom of centuries would not vanish with shifting borders or collapsing provinces. Long after the Byzantine Empire itself faded, the Corpus Juris Civilis became the cornerstone of legal traditions in medieval Europe, influencing canon law, university curricula, and eventually the civil codes of modern states. To imagine the atmosphere of its creation, think of scholars in Constantinople's libraries, unrolling scrolls and leafing through codices, debating passages by Ulpian or Gaius, choosing carefully which words to preserve. Candlelight flickers as ink stains their fingers. Outside, the sounds of the city drift in, merchants calling in the marketplace, the rumble of carts on stone streets. But within those halls, the work is patient, deliberate, and immense. The language of the code itself carries a tone of solemnity and order. Phrases like quod principi placuit legis habet vigorem, what pleases the prince has the force of law, express the majesty of imperial authority. At the same time, the texts address practical concerns: contracts, inheritance, property, crime, and marriage. In this way, the lofty ideals of Roman justice touched the daily lives of Byzantine citizens, shaping disputes over land, trade, and family. Religious influence also permeated the code. Christianity had reshaped the empire's moral landscape, and Justinian's laws reflected this. Certain pagan practices were restricted or abolished. Provisions protected the church's authority and reinforced orthodox doctrine. Family law emphasized marriage as a Christian sacrament. For Justinian, law was not only a civic instrument, but also a reflection of divine order, binding human society to heavenly justice. The law code also revealed the dual nature of Justinian's character, both visionary and meticulous. Where his military campaigns aimed at restoring territories, his legal codification restored intellectual coherence. Both projects were rooted in the same ambition, to unify and strengthen the empire. Yet while conquests could be lost, the words of the Corpus Juris Civilis endured across centuries, carried in manuscripts, studied by generations, and reborn in new contexts. As you let your mind wander, picture the parchment pages of the code, carefully inscribed and bound, resting in the imperial archives. Imagine young students in later centuries poring over the institutes in medieval universities, their candles burning late into the night, their voices reciting passages that had once been written under Justinian's command. The continuity of law, like a quiet river, flows through time, connecting distant ages. For Justinian, the codification of law was more than an administrative reform. It was a spiritual act, an offering to order and justice. In his vision, an empire could only thrive if its laws reflected clarity and truth. The Hagia Sophia and the Corpus Juris Civilis thus stand as twin monuments of his reign, one rising upward in stone, the other unfolding outward in words, both testaments to the enduring power of human aspiration. As the night deepens, we may rest on this thought, that even in the shifting tides of history, where cities fall and empires crumble, the written word endures. It carries wisdom across generations, a bridge between past and present, between rulers and the ruled. And so, in Justinian's law, the voice of Rome still whispers, steady and calm, guiding societies long after his empire's walls have vanished. As Justinian's vision of renewal unfolded, it did not remain confined to churches and laws. His dream of renovatio imperii, the restoration of the empire, extended across seas and continents. For him, the Byzantine Empire was not merely a surviving fragment of Rome, but the true continuation of it. This conviction fueled his campaigns of reconquest, vast undertakings that sought to reclaim lands once held by Rome in the West, North Africa, Italy, and even parts of Spain. These wars of reconquest would define much of his reign, shaping both its glories and its burdens. The first theater of action lay in North Africa. Since the early 5th century, the Vandal kingdom had ruled there, controlling the fertile lands of Carthage and the grain supplies that had once nourished Rome. The Vandals, originally a Germanic people, had crossed into Africa after the decline of the Western Empire. By Justinian's time, their kingdom was strong, yet internally divided. In 533, Justinian dispatched his most brilliant general, Belisarius, to reclaim the territory. With a fleet of hundreds of ships carrying soldiers, horses, and supplies, Belisarius set sail across the Mediterranean. The campaign was swift and decisive. At the Battle of Ad Decimum near Carthage, Belisarius's forces defeated the Vandals. Soon after, the Vandals' capital fell, and by 534, their kingdom had vanished. Africa was restored to imperial control, and the return of its grain shipments strengthened Constantinople. The victory was celebrated as a triumph of providence, proof that Justinian's dream of restoration could be realized. But success in Africa emboldened greater ambitions. Next came Italy, the symbolic heart of the old empire. Since the fall of the Western Roman Empire in 476, Italy had been ruled by the Ostrogoths, a Germanic people who maintained a fragile balance with Constantinople. In 535, Justinian launched a campaign to bring Italy back under Byzantine rule. Once again, Belisarius commanded the forces, advancing through Sicily and into the Italian peninsula. The struggle for Italy, however, proved far more grueling than the African campaign. For nearly 2 decades, the war ebbed and flowed across the peninsula. Belisarius captured Rome, holding the city against siege, and advanced to Ravenna, the Ostrogothic capital. Yet resistance persisted, and after Belisarius was recalled to Constantinople, the conflict reignited. It was only in the 550s, under the command of another general, Narses, that the Ostrogoths were finally defeated at the Battle of Taginae in 552 and the Battle of Mons Lactarius in 553. Italy returned to Byzantine control, but at tremendous cost. Its cities devastated, its fields ravaged, its population thinned by war. Beyond Italy, Justinian also extended his reach into Spain. The Visigothic kingdom held much of the Iberian Peninsula, but internal divisions provided opportunity. In 554, Byzantine forces secured a foothold in southern Spain, establishing what would become the province of Spania. Though smaller than his earlier conquests, this extension further symbolized Justinian's vision of restoring Roman lands. These wars of reconquest, while glorious in appearance, carried heavy burdens. The resources required, troops, ships, and gold, strained the empire. Taxation increased, discontent simmered, and the treasury grew thin. The devastation in Italy, in particular, left scars that weakened the peninsula for centuries. What had once been the thriving center of the Roman world now struggled under the weight of conflict. Yet in Constantinople, the victories were celebrated as signs of divine favor. Justinian commissioned triumphal monuments and ceremonies to mark the restoration of Roman authority. Poets and chroniclers praised the emperor as a new Augustus, reviving the empire's grandeur. Belisarius, though at times overshadowed by suspicion and political intrigue, became renowned as one of history's great generals, his campaigns remembered for their brilliance and discipline. It is worth imagining the wider Mediterranean during these years. In North Africa, farmers once again shipped grain across the sea, filling Byzantine granaries. In Italy, weary citizens watched imperial troops march through streets once walked by Caesars. In Spain, the empire's banners fluttered over new fortresses. Across these lands, people must have felt both awe and uncertainty, awed by the empire's reach, uncertain of the stability it could bring. As we reflect on Justinian's wars, we see both the splendor and the fragility of his ambition. The empire expanded dramatically, yet each conquest brought new challenges. Borders stretched wider, Defenses grew thinner, and the cost of holding these territories proved immense. His vision of a restored Roman Empire, shining once more in its ancient glory, shimmered like a dream. Brilliant, inspiring, but difficult to sustain. And so, as night settles deeper, let us picture the Mediterranean itself, the great sea that linked these campaigns. The waves carry ships laden with soldiers, sails billowing in the wind, oars cutting rhythmically through the water. From Constantinople to Carthage, from Ravenna to Seville, the sea ties together victories and hardships. Upon its surface, the dream of restoration travels outward, radiant and precarious, like moonlight on restless waters. While the victories of Belisarius and the dream of Reconquest brought Justinian glory, they also carried hidden costs. Armies and fleets could reclaim provinces, but no sword or shield could defend the empire from an invisible enemy that would soon sweep across its cities. Plague. Known to history as the Justinianic Plague, this pandemic struck in the mid-6th century and left the empire weakened, its population diminished, and its resources stretched to the breaking point. The plague first appeared around 541, during the height of Justinian's wars in the west. It spread swiftly, likely arriving in Constantinople through trade routes that connected Egypt's grain shipments to the capital. Historians believe it was caused by Yersinia pestis, the same bacterium that would later trigger the Black Death of the 14th century. But in Justinian's time, its effects were terrifyingly new. Procopius, the historian who chronicled much of Justinian's reign, provides harrowing accounts of the epidemic. He writes of streets filled with the dead, of homes abandoned, of carts carrying bodies to mass graves. At the height of the outbreak, thousands perished daily in Constantinople. The city's hum of commerce and ceremony fell silent as fear spread faster than the illness itself. Justinian himself is said to have contracted the disease but recovered, though his brush with death underscored the fragility of human ambition against nature's power. The toll of the plague rippled far beyond the capital. Across the empire, villages emptied, fields went untilled, armies shrank, and tax revenues dwindled. The vast population losses weakened agriculture and trade, creating shortages of food and goods. Soldiers could not be easily replaced, making distant conquests harder to hold. Entire communities were disrupted, leaving behind not only grief, but also economic stagnation. For ordinary Byzantines, life became a matter of survival. Imagine the narrow streets of Constantinople, once bustling with merchants and laughter, now hushed, with shutters closed and doors barred. Priests moved quietly from home to home, offering prayers and sacraments to the sick. The hippodrome fell silent, its races canceled, its cheers replaced by the tolling of funeral bells. Even Hagia Sophia, that great dome of light, became a place where prayers rose ceaselessly for deliverance from the pestilence. The empire's struggles during this time were not confined to plague alone. Pressures mounted on its borders. To the east, the Sasanian Persians pressed their claims, launching wars that drained Byzantine defenses. To the north, Slavic tribes and Bulgars pushed into the Balkans, exploiting the empire's weakened state. In Italy, Gothic resistance revived, threatening the hard-won conquests. Each frontier seemed to test the empire's strength at once, even as its population reeled from disease. Economic strains compounded the difficulty. Justinian's ambitious building projects, military campaigns, and administrative reforms required immense funding. Heavy taxation fell upon citizens already struggling with loss and scarcity. Though the emperor's vision sought renewal, to many in his empire these years felt like unending trial, with little respite from burdens. And yet, even in this time of crisis, the Byzantine state endured. Administrative structures adapted, soldiers regrouped, and life gradually resumed its rhythm. Farmers returned to their fields, merchants reopened their shops, and children once again played in the streets of Constantinople. Resilience, woven into the fabric of the empire, allowed it to withstand the blows of plague and invasion, though not without lasting scars. The memory of the Justinianic plague lingered for generations. It reminded people of the fragility of human plans, of the limits of imperial ambition, and of the mysterious forces that could overturn empires in silence. For Justinian, it must have been a humbling counterpoint to his grand vision. While he could command armies and shape laws, he could not banish disease. His empire, like all human endeavors, was subject to forces beyond control. Still, the image of Constantinople rising from these hardships is striking. Picture the city in the years after the plague, its harbors once again filling with ships, its markets alive with voices, its churches filled with light and incense. Though diminished, the empire endured, continuing to shape the course of history. As we linger with this chapter of sorrow and resilience, let the image soften in the mind. The city at dusk, after years of hardship, glows faintly against the sea. Families gather quietly in their homes, lamps flickering. The great dome of Hagia Sophia stands silhouetted against the stars, unshaken, as though to remind all who look upon it that faith and endurance carry humanity forward, even through the darkest hours. As Justinian's long reign neared its close, the weight of his efforts became clearer. The decades of building, legislating, warring, and surviving left behind both triumphs to be admired and burdens to be questioned. His legacy is complex, woven of glory and strain, resilience and fragility. To reflect upon it is to see both the brilliance of one man's vision and the sobering limits of empire. The physical monuments of his reign stood as immediate symbols of his achievement. Hagia Sophia towered above Constantinople, its dome shining in sunlight, its mosaics glowing in candlelight. Other churches, aqueducts, fortresses, and public works dotted the empire, testifying to his determination to leave behind structures of permanence. For generations, travelers marveled at these creations, seeing in them the power of an emperor who sought to bind heaven and earth together through architecture. The Corpus Juris Civilis endured even more profoundly. While buildings might crumble, words on parchment traveled through centuries. Justinian's legal code became the backbone of medieval law in Europe, studied in universities from Bologna to Paris. Even in modern times, its principles echo in civil law traditions across the globe. Few rulers in history have left such a lasting intellectual inheritance. Yet the cost of his ambitions was immense. The Reconquests, while glorious in their retelling, drained the empire's treasury and weakened its defenses. Italy, devastated by 2 decades of war, never fully recovered. North Africa, though briefly restored, faced constant pressure from Berber tribes and internal unrest. Spain remained a tenuous foothold. Though Justinian had expanded the empire's map, much of this territory was fragile, vulnerable to later invasions. Within a century of his death, much of it would be lost again. The plague of his reign further revealed the fragility of imperial dreams. Population losses undermined agriculture, trade, and the military. Heavy taxation, needed to fund wars and construction, strained the loyalty of subjects. To many citizens, the grandeur of Justinian's vision must have felt distant, while the weight of his demands pressed close. Even contemporaries like Procopius, who chronicled both his public achievements and his private faults, reflected this duality. Admiration for his works mingled with criticism of his severity and ambition. And yet, Justinian's resilience is undeniable. Few rulers faced such trials, riots that nearly toppled him, wars on multiple fronts, pandemics that decimated populations, and still pressed forward with determination. His faith anchored him. His belief that God had entrusted him with the mission of restoration gave him strength to endure setbacks. Theodora, his partner until her death in 548, had been central to this resilience. Her memory lingered in the palace, her earlier courage during the Nika Riots forever shaping the course of his reign. When Justinian died in 565, after nearly 40 years on the throne, he left behind an empire both expanded and exhausted. His nephew, Justin II, inherited not only the crown, but also the burdens of overextended borders and strained resources. The empire would struggle to maintain Justinian's conquests, and much of his territorial legacy would slip away. Yet the deeper legacy, law, architecture, faith, remained. To think of Justinian's legacy is to stand in 2 places at once. In the immediate years after his death, one might see decline. Borders threatened, finances stretched, provinces restless. But across the longer arc of history, one sees endurance. The domes that still rise, the codes that still guide, the vision of an emperor who, for a moment, seemed to reunite the Roman world. Imagine now the empire he leaves behind. Constantinople, glittering at twilight, its walls still strong, its harbors alive with ships. The Hagia Sophia rising above the city like a crown. Citizens walk along colonnaded streets, merchants call out their wares, priests chant hymns in ancient churches. Beneath it all lies the imprint of Justinian. Sometimes heavy, sometimes inspiring, always present. As you drift toward rest, let us leave him there, the emperor who dreamed of restoring an empire, who stood beside Theodora in crisis, who built domes that reached heavenward and laws that shaped centuries. His reign, long past, still whispers to us in stone and word, in city and code. It whispers of ambition tempered by fragility, of glory shadowed by cost, of dreams that reach beyond their time. And in that whisper, we find a gentle lesson, that history is not only the story of victories or defeats, but of endurance, the quiet persistence of human effort, echoing across generations. In the stillness of night, may this thought accompany you, calming the mind, softening the heart, carrying you peacefully into sleep.